The wind howled across the high plains of Wyoming, bitter and biting, slicing through threadbare coats and the last of October's stubborn courage. Cora Lancaster held her youngest child close against her chest, shielding the girl's small frame beneath a tattered wool blanket. Beside her, Eli and Rosie, only 10 and 8, sat huddled in the corner of the broken-down wagon, their cheeks red from wind and their eyes wide with quiet fear. They hadn't eaten since the morning before. The bread was gone, the apples bruised and frozen, and Thomas, the man she had once trusted to get them west, had disappeared 2 days earlier, leaving behind only lies and ruts in the trail. He had said he was going to find supplies. He never came back. Cora tightened her shawl and stepped out into the snow. The horses were gone, likely taken by Thomas himself. Her boots crunched against the brittle layer of ice as she walked a few paces forward, scanning the white horizon. Nothing, only prairie and wind, and cold. Her breath came out in clouds as she whispered to herself, "Don't cry, Cora. Not in front of them. You've got 3 reasons not to." Back inside the wagon, she wrapped her arms around all 3 children, pulling them close. "If I don't come back before sundown, you stay put," she said softly. "Promise me, Rosie." The little girl's eyes widened. "But Mama, where are you going?" "Just to find a house, a barn, anything." Eli's voice was hoarse. "You're gonna freeze out there." Cora kissed each of their foreheads. "Not if I hurry." She stepped out again, every step aching, her hands stiff and raw. Snowflakes swirled in the air like little needles. She kept walking. Not because she was brave, but because there was no other choice. Miles away, in a low valley near Timber Ridge, Levi Mercer was chopping wood outside his cabin when he noticed a flicker on the distant ridgeline. Something dark, moving oddly. He lowered the axe and squinted into the snow. His dog Jasper whined beside him. "Stay," Levi murmured. He grabbed his rifle, just in case, and made his way toward the ridge. As he crested the rise, he spotted her. A woman, half collapsed, her shawl tangled, her face ghost pale against the snow. Levi rushed forward. "Ma'am?" She looked up with dry, cracked lips. "3 children?" Then she crumpled into the snow. He didn't think, he acted. Scooping her into his arms, he whispered, "Hold on." Then he turned back toward the cabin, not knowing he was carrying more than a stranger. He was carrying the beginning of something that would change his life forever. Levi kicked open the cabin door with one boot and rushed inside, the unconscious woman limp in his arms. Jasper barked and backed out of the way, sensing something urgent and unfamiliar. The warmth of the fire hit them both immediately, though it did nothing to soften the snow clinging to her skirts. Levi laid her down gently on the bearskin rug near the hearth and grabbed every blanket he could find. 3, all scratchy but thick. He knelt beside her, removing her gloves and boots carefully. Her fingers were blue-tipped, her lips cracked and bleeding. But she was alive. "Barely. Come on," he muttered, his voice low but steady. "You've made it this far, sweetheart. Don't quit on me now." He stoked the fire higher, boiling water on the stove for tea and soup. Afterward, he slipped her soaked shawl off and wrapped her tightly in dry wool, rubbing her arms gently to coax warmth back into her skin. It wasn't until nearly 2 hours later that her eyes flickered open, dark, afraid, confused. "Where?" "You're safe," Levi said softly, crouched at her side. "You're at my ranch, Timber Ridge. You collapsed a few miles north." She tried to sit up, then winced. "The children." Levi leaned forward. "What children?" The urgency in her face surged back like fire through thawed veins. "My babies," she rasped. "They're still in the wagon, all 3. "Where?" She blinked rapidly. "The old trail, broken wheel, half covered by snow, please." He was already on his feet, grabbing his coat and rifle. "I'll find them." Outside, the storm was thinning, but the wind still bit deep. Levi saddled up quickly, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning every break in the land. It took him nearly 40 minutes to find the wagon. Its wheels sunk, the canvas rimmed in ice. Inside, 3 pairs of frightened eyes stared back at him. The girl clutched a little boy to her chest, and a thin older boy held a stick like a weapon. Levi raised his hands. "Easy now, your mama's safe. She sent me." The oldest didn't move. "How do we know?" Levi reached into his pocket and pulled out a scarf. Brown wool frayed at the edge. "She gave me this." The little girl whimpered. "Mama's scarf." That was enough. Back at the cabin, Cora sat upright, pale but trembling with hope as the door opened and the 3 children tumbled in behind Levi, half frozen but whole. But she cried then. Not from pain, but from the kind of relief that shakes the bones. Levi watched them, his face unreadable, his heart doing something it hadn't done in a long time. It stirred. Levi spent the rest of the day tending to the children. They were quiet but alert, moving with the practiced instinct of kids who'd had to grow up too fast. He fetched hot broth, dry clothes, and towels for their frozen hands. The oldest boy, Eli, refused help at first, determined to stay on his feet. "I can take care of them," he said, jaw clenched as he stood beside his younger sisters. "We don't need pity." Levi knelt to his eye level. "This isn't pity, son. It's warmth. Take it." Cora rested in the corner of the room on Levi's old cot, her children curled up beside her, one under each arm, and the littlest across her lap. She watched Levi in silence, studying his deliberate, careful way of moving, how he didn't hover or question, just did what was needed. Finally she spoke, her voice a dry whisper. "I thought we'd die out there." "You almost did." She looked down. "You don't even know us. Why would you help?" Levi shrugged, stoking the fire. "Because you needed it. No one ever helps without a reason." He paused, then looked at her. Steady, quiet. "Maybe I've been alone long enough to know what not to ignore." Later that evening, after the children had drifted off to sleep on the rug near the fire, Cora and Levi sat across from each other sharing a cup of weak tea. She finally gave him her name. "Cora Lancaster." "Levi Mercer. You live here alone?" He nodded. 5 years now, just me and Jasper." She tilted her head. "You don't get lonely?" He looked toward the flames. "Not until lately." Cora tucked her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Their father left us outside Casper. Said he'd be back with supplies. I waited 2 days before I realized he was never coming back." Levi's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I should have known better. I had no business trusting him. But my kids were hungry. I thought maybe if I just followed long enough, things would settle." Levi looked at her then, truly looked. "You don't have to justify surviving." She held his gaze. "You don't know what it's like, Mr. Mercer. Folks see a woman with 3 kids and no ring, and they decide everything about her." "I don't care about any of that," he said simply. "What I do care about is keeping you and your little ones from freezing to death under my roof." Her lip quivered, but she nodded. "Then I guess we're staying. At least until we figure out what's next." Levi leaned back slowly. "Take all the time you need." Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside, for the first time in weeks, the cold no longer owned her bones. And in the man across from her, Cora saw not a rescuer, but maybe the first safe place she'd ever known. The next morning, the ranch was blanketed in deep, fresh snow. The world outside was still, muffled by winter's weight, but inside the old cabin, a different kind of hush had settled, the hush of tentative peace. Cora awoke to the sound of Levi in the kitchen, moving quietly as though he didn't want to wake them. The children were still asleep, tangled together under a thick quilt near the fire. She rose slowly, her limbs stiff but no longer trembling from cold. The borrowed flannel shirt Levi had given her hung loose on her shoulders, but the warmth clung to her skin like a promise. When she stepped into the kitchen, Levi turned with a nod. "Coffee's hot, and I rustled up some cornbread from the cellar." She blinked at him. "You didn't have to—" He cut her off with a small gesture. "I know. Sit down." They ate in silence for a few moments. Cora watched the way he moved. Economical, strong, but never harsh. She hadn't seen a man move like that in years. Maybe never. "I used to bake biscuits," she murmured, "back when we had a stove that worked. My youngest, Lottie, she'd eat 6 in one sitting if I let her." Levi smiled faintly. "She's got good taste." When the children woke, Levi had already shoveled the path to the barn. Eli insisted on helping, following him out with silent determination and a borrowed coat too large for his frame. Cora watched from the doorway as the two figures worked side by side. Levi didn't talk much, but he didn't have to. There was something grounding about his presence. Solid, dependable, unspoken. Later, Eli returned inside, flushed from the cold but brighter somehow, like someone had seen him, really seen him, for the first time in months. By evening, the storm clouds had moved on, and the stars returned to the sky. Cora stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and leaned on the porch railing. Levi joined her after a moment, standing quietly beside her. "They're safe," she said. "That's all that matters." "You're safe too," Levi replied. She looked at him then, studying the lines of his face in the moonlight. "Why did you really take us in, Levi?" He hesitated. "Because something in your eyes looked too much like something I once saw on my own." Cora's breath caught. It was more honest than anything she'd heard in years. Inside, the fire crackled. The children slept. And on the porch, 2 people who had every reason to close themselves off stood still, letting winter's silence wrap around them. Not as a barrier, but as a bond. Something had begun between them, something neither of them dared name yet, but neither wanted to walk away from it. The following days fell into a quiet rhythm. Levi rose early to tend to the livestock. Eli followed him like a silent shadow, always watching, always eager. The boy barely spoke, but something was changing in him. His steps less cautious, his eyes brighter in the early light. Cora cleaned what she could in the cabin, careful not to overstep. She mended what few clothes the children had left intact from the journey, sewing by firelight with fingers raw but steady. Levi didn't interfere. He only made sure there was warm stew on the stove every evening and that wood was always stacked by the hearth. One afternoon, after finishing the morning chores, Levi returned to find Cora out back, hammer in hand, fixing a loose shutter with surprising precision. He stood there for a long moment watching her. Not out of scrutiny, but out of something else. Respect, maybe. Or curiosity. "You've done that before," he finally said. Cora straightened, wiping a smudge of dust from her cheek. "A long time ago. My father was a carpenter before he lost his leg in a logging accident. Taught me just enough to be dangerous." Levi chuckled. "Dangerous looks good on you." It wasn't flirtation, not really. But it caught her off guard anyway. She looked at him then. Really looked. And for the first time, the weariness in her posture shifted. Not gone, but lighter. Later that night, as the wind howled outside, Cora sat beside Levi near the fire. The kids were asleep again, exhausted from their first day helping gather kindling. "I haven't felt safe like this in a long time," she admitted softly. Levi didn't look at her. He just stared into the flames. "Neither have I." They didn't speak again for a long while. But they didn't have to. The next morning, the snow melted just enough for Cora to see the outline of the valley below the ranch. Endless, open, and free. She stood there for a while in the doorway, Lottie on her hip and her boys behind her. Levi came up beside her, his boots crunching in the frost. "You could leave if you wanted to," he said, his voice low. "Storms passed." She glanced at him. "I know," she replied, "but I'm not sure I want to." Levi didn't press. He only nodded once, and in that single gesture something unspoken was agreed upon. Not ownership, not obligation, just room to stay, room to breathe. The chill of early spring lingered in the valley, but the worst of winter had passed. The ranch creaked back to life, trees swelling with buds, animals stirring in their pens, and something else thawing slowly within the cabin walls. Cora had begun helping Levi more directly with the daily work, feeding chickens, boiling buckets for calves, checking the old fence line that bordered the western edge of the ranch. It wasn't asked of her. She just did it, and Levi, quiet as ever, simply made room for her. One morning, while mending the old barn door that always swung wide in the wind, Levi sliced his hand open on a rusted hinge. Cora rushed to his side. "Let me see." He pulled away at first. "It's fine." She grabbed his hand anyway, firm and unflinching. "Don't be stubborn." She washed the wound, wrapped it with fabric from one of her old petticoats, and scolded him in a whisper soft as snow. "You care for everyone but yourself," she muttered, tying the bandage tight. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. That evening, as the kids read near the fire, Cora brought a basin to Levi's side of the table. "Let me check your hand," she said. He extended it wordlessly. As she peeled back the cloth and replaced it gently, her touch lingered. She didn't mean for it to be tender, but it was, and Levi noticed. That night, she lay awake in the small room she shared with the children. Lottie slept curled against her chest, but Cora's mind was elsewhere. Why had his eyes held hers like that? Why had she let them? 2 days later, Eli approached Levi while he worked the back fence. The boy was still cautious but less afraid. "Can I help?" Eli asked. Levi handed him a coil of wire and nodded. "Here, let me show you how to wrap it tight." And so they worked, side by side, not as strangers anymore. Not quite as family yet, but something close. Back in the cabin, Cora stirred a stew and looked out at the two figures in the field. She felt the strangest thing rise in her chest. Not fear, not sadness. Hope. It terrified her. But she didn't look away. A week passed, then another. The snow vanished from the fields, and so too did the silence between Levi and the little family he had taken in. What began as quiet cohabitation now felt like something more. Something none of them dared name just yet. Cora found herself humming again. That morning, while braiding Lottie's hair, she caught her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she didn't look like a woman just surviving. She looked like a mother reclaiming her rhythm. Maybe even a woman with reason to hope. That evening, while the children slept, Levi lingered at the table longer than usual. Cora brought over 2 cups of strong tea and sat across from him. A log cracked loudly in the fire, You ever wonder, she said, staring into the flickering orange light, why some people are meant to find each other in the most broken ways? Levi didn't answer immediately. He turned the cup in his hand, then replied with a voice rougher than usual. Maybe because broken people are the only ones brave enough to stay. The silence between them turned soft. Not awkward, not afraid, just full. Later that week, Levi returned from town with flour, tobacco, and a surprise for the children. A sack of peppermints. Cora's eyes widened when the children squealed. Where did you find those? He shrugged. Store clerk owed me. But his faint smile betrayed the truth. He had done it just to hear those kids laugh. And she had seen it. She saw it all now. The way he stood taller when they were near. The way he always waited to eat until the children had first. The way his eyes lingered on her hands when she kneaded dough, like he was memorizing the motion. One afternoon, as Cora hung laundry behind the barn, a sudden gust of wind tugged the clothesline loose. The sheet flew free, blinding her for a second until Levi's hand reached out, catching the corner midair. Their fingers brushed and didn't pull away. Their eyes met, and this time neither of them looked down. The space between them shrank until there was no wind, no clothespins, no questions. Just a man and a woman, scarred by different battles but standing in the same piece. That night, after tucking in the children, Cora stepped outside to find Levi repairing the porch step. Can't sleep? She asked. He paused. Didn't want to. She moved beside him and sat down. This place, it's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. He nodded. It was quieter before. Do you miss that? He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, No, not anymore. Cora looked up at the sky, at the stars that stretched out like promises waiting to be believed in, and for the first time she let herself believe. Spring whispered into the valley with thawing creeks and softer winds. Snow melted from the roof, and with it melted something else, whatever distance remained between Cora and Levi. The children now ran freely around the ranch like they'd always belonged. Levi built Lottie a swing from an old rope and a plank, and he taught the boys how to whittle with care and patience. They called him Mr. Levi, but sometimes Cora caught the youngest slipping. Pa. He never corrected them. One evening, Cora brought dinner out to the porch where Levi was watching the sunset. I used to think there wasn't anything left for me, she said softly, setting down the plate beside him. No safety, no chance, just moving forward, because standing still meant falling apart. Levi looked over at her, his eyes full of a quiet understanding only life can teach. That's what I used to think, too. And now? She asked. He hesitated. Now, I think maybe I was just waiting for the right people to show up. Cora blinked back unexpected tears. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything that still couldn't be said. Not yet, but it was coming. The next morning, a letter arrived from her sister in Missouri. Cora sat at the table staring at the folded paper. What is it? Levi asked, wiping his hands on a rag as he came in from the barn. She's offering to take us in, Cora said. Says she has room and we can start over. Levi nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. He didn't want to stop her, but he also didn't want her to go. Cora folded the letter again, carefully. I told her I'd think about it. That night, Levi found himself pacing the barn. His chest felt tight. He couldn't shake the thought. Maybe he wasn't enough. Maybe she deserved someone with more than calloused hands and a small ranch on the edge of nowhere. But then he heard a soft voice behind him. I'm not leaving. He turned. Cora stood in the doorway, barefoot, holding her shawl around her shoulders. I thought about it, she said, voice steady. And I realized, this is the new start. Right here. With you. Levi took a slow step forward, as if afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. You sure? He asked. She smiled through the tears forming in her eyes. I've never been more sure. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the ranch changed. But it was good. Fuller. Happier. Cora planted a garden by the fence. The kids helped Levi repair the chicken coop, and at night, they'd all gather around the fireplace and read aloud. Then one morning, as Levi prepared the horses for a supply run, he noticed a small box sitting on the saddle. Inside was a folded note in Cora's handwriting. You once said you didn't know how to start over, but Levi, you already have, and so have I. See, he tucked the note into his pocket and rode off smiling, because for the first time in years, he was riding toward something worth coming home to. The days grew longer, and the air warmed with spring's full arrival. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt as if it had always been meant for 5 people instead of 1. Laughter echoed through the barn, Tiny boot prints trailed behind Levi's in the dirt. Cora's gentle humming filled the kitchen as something always simmered on the stove. But peace, as Levi well knew, never came without interruption. It started with clouds on the horizon. Levi stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching a wall of dark sky creep toward the ranch. Could be just wind, he muttered, but deep down he knew better. Cora joined him, her hand slipping into his. What do we need to do? Levi didn't flinch. Barn doors tight, livestock in, and we'll ride it out. By nightfall, the storm was no longer creeping, it was roaring. Lightning lit up the plains. The children huddled in the corner of the cabin, wide-eyed but silent. Cora wrapped them in quilts, her body tense but her voice calm. Levi burst in, soaked from head to toe. Roof's holding, for now. Then a crash, wood splintering. The barn, Levi shouted, grabbing his coat again. I'm coming with you, Cora said, grabbing the lantern. No, stay with the kids. But she shook her head. You're not going out there alone. They ran into the storm side by side against the wind, toward the breaking world. The barn door had come loose. Levi threw his weight against it, trying to latch it back while Cora held the lantern high. Thunder cracked, and a young calf bolted past her. Levi! She screamed, chasing after it without thinking. Cora, no! He yelled, abandoning the door. She caught up with the calf near the fence, but in doing so she slipped, mud sucking at her boots, knees hitting the ground hard. Levi reached her just in time, pulling her up with one arm while wrapping the other around the frightened calf. By the time they made it back to the barn, both were covered in mud, shivering but laughing, because somehow they'd done it. Together. The storm passed by morning. They stood under the sky, watching golden light crack through the clouds. The barn was battered, but still standing. So were they. Cora leaned her head against Levi's shoulder. Do all storms feel this loud out here? He smiled. Only the ones that matter. That evening, with the kids asleep and a pot of stew cooling on the stove, Cora brought out a worn envelope. I found this, she said, handing it to Levi. It was a letter, from her past, from the children's father. Levi didn't read it. He didn't ask. Instead, he looked at her and said, Do you still need what's in there? Cora shook her head. No, I just needed to be reminded of how far I've come. And she dropped the envelope into the fire. Outside, the earth was soaked but ready. Levi looked out over his field and said, Tomorrow we plant. Together, Cora replied, because storms didn't just tear things down. They watered the ground for something better to grow. The storm had passed, but the work was just beginning. Spring sunlight fell gently on the newly cleared rows of soil. Levi stood with a sack of seed slung over his shoulder, watching Cora show the boys how to push the corn kernels into the earth with careful fingers. He smiled as Lottie, with hands still too small for the job, proudly plopped her seeds into a crooked line. Cora caught his gaze, her eyes warm with something deeper than thanks, something like belonging. That afternoon they worked side by side in comfortable silence, interrupted only by wind and laughter. The ranch had changed. It was no longer a quiet retreat for a grieving widower. It had become a place of noise, of growth, of life. And it was finally beginning to feel like a home. But home, Levi knew, wasn't just about the soil underfoot. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Levi sat with his back against the porch post. He looked out over the field, freshly planted. He felt the ache in his muscles, the familiar tug in his chest, both from labor and from something he wasn't yet brave enough to name. Cora stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on a dishcloth. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. I've been thinking, Levi said quietly. About what? She asked, sitting beside him. You, the kids, all this. He paused. I never expected to care again, not this way, not this much. Cora reached over and placed her hand on his. I didn't either. They sat together under the stars, the silence full of truth neither had dared speak aloud. Until now. A week later, while loading supplies into the wagon for town, Levi overheard the boys talking. Do you think Mr. Levi's going to marry Ma? One whispered. The other snorted. I think Ma's just waiting for him to ask. Levi froze, heart pounding. He hadn't realized how deeply the children saw him, or how clearly they understood what had grown between them. He looked back at the house, where Cora stood on the porch brushing Lottie's hair, unaware of the thoughts now blooming in his mind. Later that night, Levi approached her with a small box. Nothing fancy, just a ring carved from wood. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out. It ain't gold, he said. Ain't much at all, really. But it's real, and it's mine, and I want to give it to you. Cora's eyes welled with tears. I don't need gold, she whispered. I just needed you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, quiet, simple, unceremonious, their new life truly began. Spring passed into early summer, and with it came blooms, laughter, and the steady rhythm of building something lasting, not just a family but a future. And every evening, as the sun set over the western hills, two people who had once lost everything stood hand in hand, proof that even the hardest winters could lead to the warmest spring. Summer brought more than sunshine. With the crops thriving and the ranch buzzing with life, it seemed Levi and Cora had found their rhythm. The children flourished. Lottie picked wildflowers for the kitchen table each morning, while the boys took turns learning how to mend fences, their laughter echoing across the prairie. But no joy comes without its shadow. One hot afternoon, while Levi was tending to the well, a rider approached. Dust trailed behind the horse like a warning, and Cora stepped onto the porch, her hand tightening around Lottie's. The man pulled off his hat, a stranger, thin, sunburned, but with a certain slickness in his eyes. "Name's Waylon," he said, voice slow and oily. "I'm looking for Cora Madden." Levi stiffened. Cora stepped down slowly. "I'm Cora." The man smiled. Too wide. "You got family back east? Brother-in-law name of Silas? He's been asking around." Cora's face lost its color. Levi stepped forward. "She don't want trouble," he warned. "Don't we all?" Waylon said, lifting his hands. "Just passing on a message. Silas wants what's his." Then he turned and rode off, leaving dust and tension behind. That night, Cora sat at the kitchen table, silent as the children slept. "Silas was my husband's brother," she finally said. "Cruel man. Always thought women and children were property. When Elias died, Silas said I should belong to him." Levi's jaw clenched. "He's not coming here." She nodded, but her voice cracked. "Levi, if he comes and he files some claim, he could try to take the kids. Say I'm unfit." "He won't," Levi said, firm and low. "Not while I'm standing." She looked at him. This man who'd taken them in, not out of obligation, but out of choice, out of love. "We should make it legal," Levi added quietly. "You, me, the kids, this life." They married beneath the tree near the creek. No preacher, no guests, just them, the land, and a promise. Levi carved a second wooden ring for the boys to present. Lottie carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and when they kissed, it wasn't fireworks, it was a grounding, solid, quiet, real. But as they signed the paper down at the sheriff's office, Levi caught sight of something unsettling. A name on the ledger, Waylon L., lodging for 3 nights. Cora saw it too. "He's still here," she murmured. Levi nodded. "And he's watching." The peace they'd built had drawn attention. But it wasn't just Cora's past clawing back to the present. It was a warning. Some folks, like Waylon and Silas, didn't like seeing people rise from the ashes. And Levi knew this love, this family, might soon have to fight to stay whole. The town of Bell Creek, usually quiet, save for the distant whistle of train horns and the chatter of shopkeepers, now carried a tension just under the surface. Levi felt it as he walked down the street, the weight of unfamiliar eyes, the subtle nods from locals who'd heard rumors they didn't know how to ask about. Waylon was still there. And worse, he wasn't alone anymore. Cora stood on the porch that morning, clutching a letter dropped at their door. No envelope, no signature. Just words in rough handwriting. She can't hide behind a new name and a new man forever. Levi folded the note carefully and put it in his vest pocket, eyes narrowing as he stared out at the prairie. The stillness of the morning no longer comforted. It threatened. At the general store, Levi spotted Waylon leaning against the rail post outside. Their eyes locked for a moment. "You like playing house, rancher?" Waylon said casually, not moving. "But I know a lie when I see it. She's stolen. And stolen things always come with a price." Levi walked straight past him, said nothing. But that night, he moved his shotgun from the storage shed to the back door. Cora, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt. She had finally allowed herself to believe in a second chance, a real home. But now her children's safety, Levi's peace, was again under threat because of her past. "You don't have to do this," she whispered that night as they sat on the porch swing, the sky painted in twilight blues. "You didn't ask for this fight, or I didn't ask to fall in love with you either," Levi replied. "But here I am, and I don't run." The next day brought escalation. Waylon arrived at the sheriff's office with paperwork, a supposed guardianship claim filed by Silas, asserting that Cora's children, being of Madden blood, were under his legal purview since she'd been declared unstable in her late husband's will. The sheriff, an old friend of Levi's named Connors, refused to accept the document. "She's married now," Connors said. "Her husband's standing in her stead. You want to contest it, you'll need to see a federal judge. Whalen smiled darkly. Already in the works. That night, Levi gathered his closest ranch hands, men who'd ridden with him through floods and fire, drought and dust storms. This ain't just about me, he said. It's about the kind of men we let run others off their land, off their lives. They nodded, grim-faced. And from that moment on, a silent watch began around the homestead. Each night, one of them circled the property. No words needed. Levi wasn't protecting a guest. He was guarding his family. Inside the house, Cora knelt beside her boys as they drifted off to sleep. Lottie clung to her doll, sensing change in the air. Will Uncle Silas take us away? One of the boys whispered. No, Cora said firmly. He won't. She walked out into the hallway where Levi stood in shadow. Tell me we'll be okay, she said. We will, he promised. But behind his eyes a storm brewed, and Levi knew men like Silas didn't give up, not without a fight. The next morning, Bell Creek buzzed with whispers. News traveled fast in a small town, and it didn't take long before folks started murmuring about the man with the papers and Levi's new bride. Some sided quietly with Levi, others stayed out of it, but everyone watched. Levi sat with Sheriff Connors on the back porch of the station, sipping strong black coffee from a chipped enamel mug. You know what Silas is after, Connors said. He doesn't care about Cora's past. He wants control, power. And if that means dragging 3 kids into court, he'll do it. Levi nodded, his gaze far off. Then I reckon I need to make sure he never gets the chance. Cora spent the morning helping Lottie learn her letters. Her sons practiced their reading in the corner, but the tension in the room was thick. They could feel it too. When Levi returned home, she looked up from the floor where she sat cross-legged with the children. He's pushing harder, isn't he? Levi didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt beside her and whispered, We might need to leave for a few days. Lay low until I can sort this. I won't run again, Cora said. That's how I lost everything last time. Then we won't run, but we'll protect what's ours. That night, while the stars blinked coldly above, Silas Whalen stood on the edge of the Maddox property. He hadn't come alone. 2 men flanked him, hired hands from out of town, men who didn't ask too many questions. One of them pointed toward the barn. That's where they keep the horses. Want us to spook 'em? Burn it? Silas considered it, his lips curling into a sneer. No, not yet. Let's make 'em think first. That'll hurt worse. At dawn, the Maddox family woke to find red paint streaked across their barn door. One word, in bold slashes. Thief! The boys stared in silence. Lottie began to cry. Cora hugged her children, keeping her voice steady. It's just paint, babies. We wash it off and we keep going. Levi stood behind her, jaw clenched. That night he made a decision. He rode into town and walked into the Bell Creek Gazette, slapping a few crisp bills on the counter. I want a notice printed, he told the editor. Full page, public record. The editor glanced down. About what? About the truth. The next morning's paper bore the headline, Widower Marries Woman Fleeing Abuse. Town rallies around new family. In it, Levi told the whole story, without shame. About how he found Cora and the children, how Silas had tried to buy his way into custody, how Bell Creek could choose to protect the innocent or stay silent for a rich man's power. The effect was immediate. Mrs. Hatley, who ran the bakery, showed up with pies. The schoolmarm offered to tutor the boys for free, and the preacher's wife brought warm coats for the children. Silas Whalen raged when he read the paper. She turned me into the villain, he spat. But I've got more money than that whole town combined. His lawyer, seated across from him, sighed. Maybe so, but public opinion wins juries. You'll lose if you press this further. Silas threw a glass at the wall. I don't care what it costs. But what Silas hadn't counted on was blood. His own brother, Jacob Whalen, a quiet rancher who'd cut ties years ago, rode into Bell Creek unannounced. He walked right up to Levi's porch, hat in hand. You don't know me, but I know what Silas is, Jacob said. And I've got land, influence. I'm willing to testify against him. Levi blinked. Why now? Jacob shrugged. Tired of watching bullies win. And for the first time in weeks, Levi looked at Cora and said with confidence, We've got a real shot. Because now they weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. The morning light that filtered into the Maddox home felt different. Not softer, but steadier. Like the sun itself had decided they were worth shining on again. Cora stood in the kitchen, hands in dough, teaching Lottie how to knead with gentle strength. The boys ran past the window outside, chasing each other with sticks, their laughter rising like birdsong. It was the kind of sound that only came when children felt safe. And for the first time in a long time, Cora believed they were. At the Bell Creek courthouse, Levi stood in front of the judge with his back straight, his voice calm. Jacob Whalen had testified first, clear, direct, unwavering. My brother Silas manipulated this woman's life for his own gain. She came to Bell Creek with nothing but her children and fear in her eyes. But she didn't take anything. She was given shelter, love, and dignity. And I'd stake my own name on it. The room had been quiet when he finished. Silas, seated 2 rows behind, turned gray. Back at the ranch, Cora opened the letter from the court with trembling fingers. Levi hadn't been able to call or write with the outcome. She read the words slowly, aloud to herself. Custody remains with the mother, Cora Jennings. No further claims will be honored. Tears blurred her vision. Lottie came running. Mama, what is it? Cora knelt and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. We're staying home, baby. We're safe now. That night, there was a knock at the door. Levi stood there, dusty from travel, a tired smile on his face. We won, he said. And just like that, Cora flew into his arms. Not out of desperation, but because she wanted to. Spring bloomed early that year in Bell Creek. Wildflowers pushed up from the red soil, and Levi taught the boys to ride, one at a time, until they could canter with joy. The townsfolk began calling the Maddox place the Heartland House, because it pulsed with new life. And the bakery started stocking something new, Cora's bread, named by Mrs. Hatley herself, because I never met a woman who could rise after falling so low. One late evening after supper, Levi and Cora sat on the porch swing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a silver band. I never did ask properly, he murmured. Cora Jennings, would you let me try again? Not because we have to, but because I want to love you as your husband, as your partner. Cora's heart swelled. You already are, she whispered, but she took the ring anyway, and kissed him like she never had before. Bell Creek had once been just a dot on the map to her, a place to run through. Now it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Not a happy ending, a real one. Built on storms weathered, hands held, and hearts that chose each other. The days that followed felt like dreams rooted in earth, simple, real, and precious. Cora found herself laughing more, not because life had become easy, but because it had become hers. No more running, no more doubting, and no more fear. Preparations for the wedding were quiet, but meaningful. It wasn't a grand affair, just a gathering of Bell Creek hearts under the wide blue sky. Lottie picked wildflowers with Mrs. Hatley for her mama's hair. The boys practiced walking straight, boots thudding like proud drum beats as Levi helped them tie hand-me-down ties. They look like little ranchers already, Levi said, ruffling Ben's hair. They've had a fine teacher, Cora replied, her voice soft with love. The wedding was held near the stream that ran behind the ranch, the one Levi had shown her the first day she arrived, the very spot where he taught the boys to fish, and where Cora had once cried quietly while the kids played. Now, it shimmered with sunlight and the murmurs of wind through trees. As Cora walked toward Levi, barefoot in a dress stitched by kind hands from the town, she saw not just a man, she saw a future, a partner, a healer, a father to her children, and maybe one day, the father of one more. I promise to walk beside you, she said in her vows, voice steady despite the emotion. Not because I'm afraid, but because I've found strength in you. Levi, ever the man of few words, simply said, You gave me back my heart. I'll spend the rest of my life protecting yours. The applause came in laughter and clapping and even a few cheers. But it was the way the kids hugged them afterward, tight, full of belonging, that made the moment unforgettable. In the weeks that followed, they built more than just routines. They built family. Cora started writing letters to her past self. Not to mail, just to forgive. To say, You made it. You were never broken. Just waiting to be seen. Levi expanded the barn with Jacob's help and began teaching a few local boys the art of ranching. One of them, a quiet kid named Sam, reminded him of himself. He'd lost his father young. Levi made sure he had someone to look up to. One evening, as the stars appeared one by one, Cora watched Levi teach the boys how to track stars for direction. An old Comanche trick his grandfather once told him. Mama, Lottie whispered beside her, do you think we'll stay here forever? Cora looked around. The porch, the fields, the fireflies blinking like scattered memories. She smiled. I think we've already begun. The chill of early spring still clung to the mornings, but the land was alive with promise. Seedlings pushed bravely through thawed soil. And inside the house, Levi built with rough hands and quiet hope. Something else began to bloom. Cora stood on the porch one morning, arms crossed over her belly, her fingers instinctively cradling the gentle curve forming beneath her dress. She hadn't meant to find herself here again. Not physically, not emotionally, but this time was different. This child was growing not from fear, but from love. She waited until breakfast, when the kids had run off to feed the chickens and Levi was quietly sipping coffee, to place a folded note next to his mug. Levi looked up, eyes narrowed in curiosity. He opened it. The note read, "One more set of boots coming this fall." He stared at it for a long moment, blinking. And then he smiled. Not a wide smile. Levi wasn't that kind of man, but the kind that softened his whole face. He reached out and placed a hand over hers without saying a word. But he didn't need to. She knew what it meant. That night, Cora wrote again in her journal. Her entries had grown infrequent, not because she had less to say, but because she had fewer wounds to heal. She wrote, "I came here carrying 3 hearts, all bruised. Now we are 6, counting Levi, and 1 more on the way. Love doesn't just patch the broken, it builds something new." A few days later, townsfolk began to notice the glow about her. Mrs. Hatley winked and said, "It's the kind of shine that doesn't come from soap or sunlight." Even the boys were gentler with her, opening doors and fussing over the firewood. One evening, Ben tugged at Levi's sleeve. "Pa?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, bud. Do you think the baby will like horses?" Levi chuckled. "With this family, the baby will ride before it walks." As weeks turned into months, the household hummed with new rhythms. Cora kept painting again. Small canvases of skies and trees, gifts for neighbors. Levi taught Lottie how to braid rope. Jacob and Ben carved their initials into the old oak out back. The past, once so heavy, now felt like an old coat they'd outgrown. Then came the night of the storm. Not one of weather, but of uncertainty. Cora woke with a pain sharp enough to steal her breath. Too early. Too soon. The midwife wasn't due for another month. Levi rushed to her side, wide-eyed but steady. "I'll go," he said. "I'll bring her back." "No," Cora gasped. We'll do this here." The kids were with Mrs. Hatley, who had sensed something hours before and whisked them away. It was just the 2 of them, and the tiny life they prayed would stay. All through the long night, Levi held her hand, brought her water, whispered words in her ear that he'd never said aloud before. "I need you, Cora. Not just as the mother of this child, as my heart." At dawn, a cry split the silence, and then another. The baby was small but strong. "A girl!" Cora sobbed into Levi's chest as he wrapped them both in his arms, his own eyes wet. "She's perfect," he whispered. "You saved us," she said. "No," he replied, "you saved me." The sun filtered through the bedroom window, casting golden threads across the small bundle nestled in Cora's arms. The baby's breath was soft and rhythmic. Her tiny fingers curled into fists, as if grasping onto the world that had nearly slipped away. Levi sat at the edge of the bed, one hand gently resting over Cora's foot beneath the quilt, the other cradling a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't left her side since the moment their daughter cried into the dawn. "She needs a name," Cora said softly. Levi looked up, and in his eyes there was a tenderness that still caught her off guard. "You pick it," he said. "I've picked too much in this life," Cora whispered. "This time, I want her name to come from you." Levi thought for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window, where the breeze moved the curtain like a heartbeat. "My mother's name was Elsie," he said. "She wasn't soft-spoken, but she loved fierce and true." Cora smiled. "Elsie," she repeated, trying it out. The baby yawned. "Elsie Rose." Levi looked down at his daughter as if seeing a piece of heaven on earth. "Elsie Rose Harper," he said. "Sounds like someone who'll ride wild ponies and keep her brothers in line." Later that day, the townsfolk came to visit. Mrs. Hatley brought pie and sat at the edge of the bed like she owned the house. "That baby's going to grow up spoiled with all this love," she declared. The sheriff stopped by, too, not to scold Levi about the barn repairs still undone, but to shake his hand. "You've built more than a ranch here," he said. Even Reverend Silas came, offering a quiet blessing, then awkwardly handing over a knit blanket his wife had made. When the children returned home, Ben and Jacob walked in cautiously, uncertain whether to speak or shout. Lottie, however, ran straight to the bed. Cora lowered Elsie into her arms, guiding her daughter's small hands. "She's warm," Lottie whispered, "like when you sleep in fresh hay." Ben peeked closer. "She's got Pa's eyebrows." Jacob frowned. "That's not good." Everyone laughed. As days turned to weeks, the house adjusted to the new rhythm. Cora rocked Elsie in the evenings as Levi read aloud to the older kids by firelight. Meals were noisier, full of clattering dishes and overlapping stories. The silence that once haunted these rooms had been replaced with life. Messy, beautiful life. One night, Cora leaned against the doorframe and watched Levi cradle Elsie on his chest. She stepped forward, slid her arms around him from behind, and rested her chin on his shoulder. "You know," she said, "I was afraid we'd be too broken to make something whole." "We didn't make something whole," Levi said. "We became something whole." They never spoke of the past much anymore. Not out of avoidance, but because the present no longer needed to justify itself. It was enough. They were enough. And out beyond the ranch, where fields waited to be planted again, the wind carried the laughter of children and the soft cries of a baby who had been born into a house already full of love. Spring arrived in Harper Valley like a soft-spoken promise. Slow but certain. The snow had long melted, giving way to muddy trails and the scent of wildflowers reclaiming the hills. The creek behind the ranch bubbled again, and birds nested in the eaves of the barn. Everything, it seemed, was waking up. So were they. Levi stood by the fence at dawn, watching Ben and Jacob help gather the early calves. The two boys had grown taller, more confident. Jacob's clumsy footing had turned steady, and Ben had picked up Levi's habit of silently assessing before speaking. Cora stepped outside with baby Elsie bundled against her chest. She had a way of moving that made the morning seem quieter, like the earth paused to listen when she stepped across it. "You thinking you're just admiring your handiwork?" she teased, nodding toward the boys. "A little of both," Levi said with a slow grin. "Mostly I'm wondering when I got so lucky." Later that day, the townspeople gathered for the spring fair. The kids ran wild with candy sticks and flower crowns, while Cora manned a table of hand-stitched baby clothes beside the town baker. "She's beautiful," the baker said, peeking at Elsie. "Looks just like her mama." Cora smiled but didn't answer. She glanced across the field where Levi stood with Reverend Silas, listening politely as the older man told him a story about long-forgotten horse races. Levi nodded, but his eyes never stopped drifting back to Cora. It was still new, the way they kept choosing each other every day, even without saying so. That night, the family sat on the porch under a sky scattered with stars. Ben rested his head on Levi's shoulder. Jacob tried to pretend he wasn't falling asleep mid-sentence. Lottie brushed Elsie's hair with a daisy she'd picked earlier. "I never thought I'd feel settled again," Cora murmured. "You're not just settled," Levi said. "You're rooted." She turned toward him. "Rooted?" "Yeah," he said, eyes soft. "Like you belong. Like this place would fall apart without you." Cora blinked, overwhelmed, not by his words, but by how deeply she believed them. In the following weeks, Levi began expanding the barn. The family talked about planting a new orchard. Cora started teaching Lottie to read using the old books from Levi's mother's chest. For the first time in a long time, their days weren't about surviving. They were about building. Building joy. Building future. One Sunday afternoon, as the children napped, Cora and Levi sat alone by the creek. "I used to dream of escape," she said softly. "Now I dream of growing old here." Levi took her hand, calloused fingers entwined with hers. "Then we'll dream together." She rested her head against his shoulder, and they watched the water rush past, carrying away the shadows of the past, carving a new path forward just like them. The skies over Harper Valley shifted one evening in late spring. Rolling clouds gathered with quiet menace, casting long shadows over the ranch. Levi stood on the porch, sensing the change before the first crack of thunder split the distance. "Looks like we've got a wild one coming," he muttered, glancing toward the fields. Inside, Cora was ushering the children to finish dinner early. The storm had stirred the younger ones. Elsie whimpered. Lottie clung to her doll, and even Ben looked uneasy. Jacob, now nearly 11, tried to act brave. "It's just rain," he said, chest puffed. But everyone, including him, jumped at the sudden gust that slammed the window shut. Levi moved through the house, securing latches and checking the barn from a distance. He could see the animals restless, but he knew the structure would hold. Back in the house, he found Cora lighting candles, her face calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "Been a while since I weathered a storm in a house that felt like it might stand through it," she whispered. Levi wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You're safe here. All of you." As the wind howled, they gathered in the parlor. Cora sang softly to soothe the little ones, her voice carrying over the thunder. Levi sat nearby, sharpening one of his old knives more for habit than need. The storm raged for hours, but in that little room there was warmth and unity and something stronger than fear. When the calm finally settled in, the children had fallen asleep in a tangle of limbs on the floor. Cora lay beside Levi, her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heart. "You know," she whispered, "when I first showed up at your door, I thought it was the end of my story." Levi looked at her gently. "It was the beginning of mine." The next morning brought sunlight like forgiveness. The fields sparkled, the earth wet and renewed. The barn stood tall, the house unharmed. Levi took the boys out to check fences, while Cora and the girls began sweeping water from the back stoop. The land smelled clean like fresh bread and grass. That night, Levi took Cora aside and placed a small box in her hand. "I was going to wait," he said, but there's no storm strong enough to shake what I feel. She opened the box. A simple ring, silver, engraved with a wildflower. No promises for perfection, he said, just a vow to love you through every season. Cora, eyes full of tears, nodded. That's the only kind I ever wanted. They didn't need a grand wedding, just the family. A new dress stitched by a neighbor. A bouquet of lavender Lottie had picked. It wasn't about ceremony, it was about roots, about the woman who came in from the cold, the man who gave shelter, and the family they forged in the fire and quiet of the West. The wind rolled gently across Harper Valley, brushing over the golden fields like a memory. Spring was ending, and summer promised warmth not just in the air but in every corner of the ranch. Cora stood on the porch of the home Levi had built years ago with his late wife, now transformed into something entirely new. Her hand rested lightly on her growing belly, the light cotton of her dress fluttering in the breeze. From the barn, the sounds of the children laughing floated across the field. They had found it, peace. 1 year later, the ranch was livelier than ever. Jacob and Ben had taken up chores with pride, even arguing playfully over who got to ride ahead to the southern fence line. Elsie had become Levi's shadow, following him everywhere in her sunbonnet. Lottie loved the chicken coop and often brought eggs with an air of ceremony, like they were treasure. And Cora? Cora had found her voice again. She ran the kitchen, helped manage the ranch's books, and had started baking bread so good that Levi claimed it was better than anything he'd tasted in town. But the real gift came in a quiet, moonlit hour in early autumn. Cora gave birth to a baby girl with midnight eyes and lungs strong enough to rattle the walls. Levi wept as he held her. The memory of loss washed in the new beginning he cradled in his arms. "We'll call her Hope," Cora said softly, her eyes meeting his. And in that moment, every scar, every sorrow, every cold night they'd endured, melted into something far bigger than pain. The ranch became a place of stories. Travelers sometimes passed through Harper Valley. They'd stop by Levi's place for water or shelter and would leave with full bellies and warmer hearts. Some would later say, "There's something sacred on that land. Not gold, not cattle, but love, rooted in loss, grown in kindness, strengthened by storm." One winter's night, as snow fell gently and the hearth burned warm, Levi looked across the room, at Cora reading with Lottie curled beside her, at the boys playing cards, and baby Hope asleep in the cradle. And he realized something simple, something profound. He had built barns, fences, and homes before, but this time he had built a life. The West had taught him how to endure, but love had taught him how to live.